Garden Garden is a production of the University of Minnesota Morris in cooperation with Pioneer Public Television. Additional support provided by Mark and Margaret Yekel Julien in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. ShalomHillFarm.org.
Many of us love to enjoy a hot cup of coffee or tea on a cold winter day. And there's just something about an ice-cold glass of water on a hot summer day that can't be beat. We all tend to turn on the faucet and not pay any attention to how lucky we are to enjoy good, clean water. I'm your host, Mary Holm, and let's look at water, our very precious resource. When I was a little girl, running water on our farm referred to running to the well to get a bucket of water to bring into the house for drinking and cooking. When I was 12, we got indoor plumbing, and what a wonderful experience that was. Even after that, my family had a deep concern for the quality and quantity of water on our farm. Today, we are visiting with Steve Deal, who too works with water quality and quantity issues all the time. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Mary. It's a pleasure to be here.
Steve, in the news now we hear a lot about buffer zones. What exactly is a buffer zone?
Shoreline buffer zone is an unmowed native vegetation area that extends out to the lake and then into the land from the water's edge.
And what kind of waters have a buffer zone or should have a buffer zone?
Just about any waterway, lakes, rivers, streams, ponds even.
What are some of the main materials causing pollution problems in our water?
The two biggest factors are nitrogen and phosphorus. Well, when the nitrogen and phosphorus gets in our water systems, what they tend to cause is large algae blooms. And algae blooms, a lot of people would know what this is if they've seen smaller ponds and it's all like thick, kind of a green color. What that is all these algae blooms are growing at a rapid rate, and what they're doing, they're taking up all the oxygen in the water, leaving no oxygen for any of the fish or any of the plants or anything else that's happening in the water.
Is that just kind of a farming problem, or is that for everybody?
Oh, it's definitely not just a farming problem. It's definitely an urban and suburban problem. It extends to all areas, and they're all pretty equal in their sense.
It's not just an agricultural issue. You think that we as regular homeowners are probably a cause of the pollution too?
Oh, absolutely. The rural areas that have the farm fields, but in urban areas we have all the pavement, impervious surfaces, and all that goes into storm sewers, which goes directly into our lakes and streams.
What do you mean by impervious surfaces?
Impervious surfaces will include like concrete, asphalt, and even regular Kentucky bluegrass, which most people have, their lawns.
Really, I've never thought of that as an impervious surface. Why do you say that that is?
It's impervious surface because really the root systems on those only go about 2 inches into the ground, and they are really dense plants, so they don't really allow any infiltration into the ground. The water just runs right off them.
I had read one time that like a 40-acre highly residential property in the city can cause as much pollution as 40 acres of farmland. Have you heard that, or are you familiar with that?
Absolutely, and it's very true. They are essentially the same. They look different, and they might have a little bit of different of the pollutants, but essentially, like nitrogen, phosphorus, they're going to produce the same amount of pounds leading into our streams and rivers.
How much runoff will that generate from like a typical yard?
Oh, that can equal up to a lot. I mean, even the 1-inch rainstorm, which is pretty typical of area, it could amount to hundreds of gallons, depending on this area that it's coming from, but yeah, it can add up to a lot of water over time.
I suppose it depends on how much pavement or concrete and how big the roof surface is on your house.
Absolutely, there's a lot of different factors involved, but yeah, for the most part, most urban and agricultural areas have a high runoff rate.
Now, I know that you are a landscape designer. How do you get involved with water quality issues?
Biggest issue and biggest first thing I do is education. Just letting people know and understand what the problem is, first of all, and some of the things we can do to help improve our water qualities.
And who do you work with in this area? Who do you have educational classes for, or who do you work with?
I work in this area, I work with the Grant County Soil Water Conservation District, and they also partner with the Palmatier River Association in this area.
And then are there other counties that you work with too, or other homeowners associations or other groups?
I work with a lot of different counties in this area, like Stevens County, Swift, Big Stone. Every county has their conservation district in which they deal with these kind of problems.
And I believe that the homeowners can even get some cost share if they want to do some of these water control or water quality improvement projects, right?
There are a lot of cost share funds available. Everyone has to contact their local conservation districts or their watershed districts to see what kind of funds are available, if any are available. But there are, more times than not, a lot of funds available.
So what are the structures that, or what are the things that we can do in order to slow that runoff and help prevent these pollutants from getting into our water?
Well, there's shoreline buffers, shoreline restorations, and then rain gardens.
Would it be possible to see a rain garden or see what these structures look like?
Absolutely. I have a rain garden right here on site.
Now tell me, Steve, what exactly is a rain garden?
A rain garden is essentially a shallow depression perennial garden which captures stormwater and then infiltrates that stormwater into the ground rather than running off an impervious surface situation. For a rain garden, you always want to use a native vegetation, native plants, native flowers, forbs.
Why those rather than regular perennials?
Well, natives, first off, they're proven to be successful here in Minnesota. They're usually found and cultivated in this area, so they're quite hardy for droughts, quite hardy for rainy seasons. They know this area. The plants do well in this type of climate.
What are some of the plants that you have used in this rain garden?
Well, I have a variety of plants in here. I've used things like the iris here, there's sedges, blue lobelia, and even some shrubs like the dwarf bush honeysuckle. And I kind of use them first as a design. I think of a design and I use the honeysuckle in a backdrop because it's a little bit taller plant and kind of gives a backdrop to a lot of these other plants. And I try to, you know, the lower plants, the shorter plants kind of in the foreground with the taller and bigger plants in the background. You can see like the culver's root and the shrubs here. They get very tall, so that's kind of like my backdrop with all these like the blue lobelia and the alum root and the sedges kind of being in the foreground for nice texture and stuff. And then the reason why they're at where they are is because some plants can handle getting inundated with a lot of water, and some like it just a little bit drier. Not completely dry, but a little bit drier. Like you see like the alum root here. They're a short plant and they don't want to be completely inundated in water, so they kind of go up on the upper banks of the rain garden. Or like irises, they can handle a lot of water, so that's why they're kind of in the bottom of the rain garden.
And then I would guess the irises would bloom in the spring.
Irises bloom in the spring.
The prairie alum root would be more of a summer probably.
Yep, summer, and then you got like see right now the lobelia is blooming right now. So it's a whole idea of seasonality, getting a lot of interest. So no matter when you're coming out here, you're always seeing some blooms, you're always seeing some butterflies, insects, and sometimes frogs and invertebrates. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we've seen come into here.
And I know that the dwarf bush honeysuckle also has a beautiful fall color too, so it doesn't necessarily need to even bloom in order to give you some beauty in the fall.
Oh, absolutely. When I choose plants, it's not just about the flowers. Sometimes they just have a rich texture, sometimes great fall color, or maybe some spring flowers. So there's a lot of different ways of, and that's up to me to really create a nice full seasonality of the plants and color and textures.
That's what you do as a designer. So.
Yep, that's my task, is to make these things look great.
How big should you make a rain garden?
Now when it comes to sizing, it really depends on how much water you have coming into it. There's some formulas you can find, and it's really easy to size it, but essentially anything you can do is better than doing nothing.
So I see that this rain garden, it looks like it collects water from the building behind us and the concrete apron. So do you figure out the square footage of what's going to be draining into that area, or do you figure that out, or how do you
Absolutely.
figure it?
I measure out like the buildings, the roof of the building, this concrete apron, and then I try to guesstimate any of the land that's also leading into here. And that gives me my base number of the square footage leading into the garden. And then I also need to know the infiltration rate of a garden. But once I have those two numbers, I can really get an idea of how big this is.
Tell me what you mean by infiltration.
Infiltration is actually the water going into the ground. They use the native vegetation because they have a lot of deep root systems, and the water actually follows these root systems down into the ground. Every year these plants are generating new roots, and so their old roots are kind of creating all these little caves, you could say, going down into the ground. And that's where the water is flowing down into all these little root systems.
And then how many plants do you put into a rain garden?
Well, there is no definitive answer for how many plants because it really depends. Sometimes I use small sedge plants that only like 12 inches wide. Sometimes I'll use like red oak or dogwood or even some like cedar trees that can get quite large. So really how many you use really depends on the design. Trying to make it not just a very functional rain garden to infiltrate the water, but I want to do it so it looks great for the homeowner and it's a positive aesthetic to the property.
It looks like on this rain garden that there's quite a slope going down towards the lake. So how did you handle that?
Well, you can see that there is a very steep slope through here. And the biggest problem we're having is a lot of erosion. And before this rain garden was put in, you'd see, like on the heavy rains, you'd see big plumes of sediment going downhill. So the first thing we had to do is excavate a little bit upland, bring that dirt over here down to the lower end, and kind of try to flatten it out a little bit. Here I used a boulder wall to kind of create a small retaining wall so I can get the elevation up a little bit. But I never had to bring any dirt in. I just kind of balanced my cut and my fill. So I used only everything that was on the site here.
Do you use both flowers and grasses in your rain garden, and if so, why?
I use flowers, grasses, and shrubs. I like to do a variety, and a lot of it for the choices comes to the conversation with the homeowners. What do they like? Do they love flowers? Do they love the grasses, the shrubs? It's usually a conversation with the homeowners that really help me define what I'm going to put into it. And as a designer, you know, I need to really make it so they enjoy it because it's on their property, and I want them to enjoy it. When other people see them, hopefully they'll get interested enough to want to do it themselves.
I would guess you'd probably try to incorporate plants that bloom throughout the season and look nice throughout the season just to give that color to the homeowners too.
By default, I usually try to have a lot of seasonality. Getting some of those plants that start up in the spring, flowering in the summer and fall, and even have some winter interest. There's a lot of shrubs and plants like grasses. They stay up throughout the winter, and it gives a lot of winter interest. So it's nice to have that nice aesthetic going throughout the year.
I would bet that when you do have that that spacing of the blooms and stuff, you probably get quite a few butterflies and insects coming to visit the rain gardens too.
You'll notice the butterflies and insects within weeks.
Really?
Oh, they come right away. I mean, they as soon as they see the nectar and stuff, they're on it, and yeah, so you're getting all those things coming in right away.
It looks like you have actually mulched here too. You recommend mulching the rain garden plants?
Always recommend mulching, and it's not just any mulch. I usually try to tell people use the hardwood shredded mulch. Hardwood because it's usually comes from local sources, so it's not being shipped from far, and also shredded because a shredded mulch has a tendency to do a little bit more binding. Wood chips in a rain garden, they just float up and float away. So the shredded mulch tends to stay down and binds up and creates a great weed barrier. And there's nothing ever below the mulch. It's soil and then mulch.
This has quite a slope, this rain garden, or it did. Have you had any trouble with big rain events after you've put this in, as far as this filling up too much or washing away?
Well, actually, within 24 hours of putting this rain garden in, It was 2 years ago, and it was, if everyone remembers, we had a really rainy spring and even early summer. So we were getting a ton of rain, and we got rain that next day, and this thing filled up. Actually, I think it might have started raining within hours of it, and the next day this thing was completely filled up. But like all rain gardens, they kind of have an overflow area, and we do an overflow area because they're designed to capture a typical rain event, but there's always those huge rain events, and we have to know where that water is going to overflow to. Now this one overflowed an area. We weren't quite ready for all that rain, so we had a little bit of an erosion problem, but I was here right away and fixed that. But yeah, we had a great amount of rain right away, and we seen within the first day how well this thing was already capturing, and it had already stopped all the sediment. It was capturing all the water. It was coming from the apron, the concrete apron, and the roof.
How do you take care of the plants in the fall or to go into the winter?
Really, I usually don't do anything with them. Sometimes I tell people if they want to cut their perennials down on the ground just for aesthetics, if they don't want the messy plants, they can do that. But this one here, we've never done anything to it. It's on its 3rd year now, and it's never been touched. Slightly weeding, that's it. We do not fertilize any of it. That's another thing with native plants. They're ready to go in here. They're made for this climate. They're grown in this climate. They're great.
Now, this looks like it's quite a shady area, so can you do a rain garden whether you have sun or shade?
You can do a rain garden in just about anywhere. There are full shade plants, a lot of ferns. They love the shade. And there's a huge list, a palette of plants that can go for shade, sun, partial shade and sun, even acidic soils. So you can do them anywhere.
Now, you had also mentioned about doing shoreline restoration. Would it be possible to see what that looks like?
Yeah, we have a shoreline buffer right here on site also.
I have a question. What are some suggestions for an outside playing area in my yard for my toddler-age grandchildren?
Well, we are here in our brand new green play yard, and we have designed this play yard in mind with infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. Right now we're in the toddler zone. We are looking at lots of gross motor kinds of needs. What I'm sitting on now is a play sand area. Behind me you're going to see some platforms that the kids can jump off of. Those are some things that probably you have in your backyard, just some stumps that the kids can jump off and on. We have over here a little playhouse area that the kids like to paint with water, and then they can see the change between the color between the cedar going from dry to wet. And if you just have a little knoll in your yard, just having the kids being able to roll down the knoll is good. So what we're encouraging people to do is thinking outside of having these real formalized plastic kind of play yard areas and getting kids back outside and just picking up some things in nature and using those as your props to integrate into the play activity.
Ask the Arboretum Experts has been brought to you by the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum in Chanhassen, dedicated to enriching lives through the appreciation and knowledge of plants.
So here's our shoreline buffer I just mentioned. It's about 25 feet extending out from the shoreline. Use of native vegetation, once again, because these are the ones that are going to best perform in this climate. This area is far more sunnier, so we're able to use a little bit different plants, a little bit maybe more flowers, your grasses, a lot more of your prairie plants here.
I suppose this is a little bit drier too than in the rain garden area.
Much drier than a rain garden because this isn't intended to capture water. This is intended to kind of be a filter area for the water that's going towards the lake. So this is kind of like a big long filter strip.
So this is an area that you would want it to catch the pollutants before they get into the water.
It's catching the pollutants before it gets in the water, and it's also creating a lot of rich, diverse habitat for a lot of insects, animals, which creates, anything. Whenever you can get a lot more diversity in the wildlife, the better the water quality. So it's not just about filtering water. It's also about creating a lot more habitat for the, this happens to be on a lake, but can be on a stream or creek.
So what kind of plants did you use here?
On the shoreline buffers, I'm usually able to use a lot more plants because it's oftentimes a much bigger area. This one happens to be about 25 feet out from the lake edge. DNR likes to see 25 to 50 feet, but even if you can get 5 to 10 feet, still great. It's still going to do a lot of filtering and create a lot of habitat. But like I said, big area, I'm able to use a lot more plants, so I can really let my designing kind of stretch out a little bit. You can see like asters. I have a lot of native grasses, black-eyed Susans, liatris, actually some more dogwood, some dwarf bush honeysuckle, irises, monarch butterflies. Love the liatris. Every year we see the butterflies over here. I also just like its texture. It's kind of a tall plant. Starts off kind of, pretty low in the springtime, but as you kind of see it, as the summer goes, you see this thing getting taller. All of a sudden, there's just beautiful spikes of purple flowers. And as soon as those flowers start opening up, you see the butterflies. Same thing with black-eyed Susan. Just that beautiful yellow, got that dark brown center of them. And the butterflies and insects just love them. They're kind of the midsummer to late summer kind of plants. So for me, the seasonality works well because I'm often around these areas that time of year. So that's one of my favorite ones. I love the asters. I love the aesthetics. Some of them, they're tall, they're lush, and got a great little flower. And they get just tons of these blooms on them. And once again, as soon as those blooms open up, the butterflies start coming through.
Well, the nice thing about some of these plants is, some of our other flowers will kind of start to peter out in the fall, and it looks like they're really just starting to come into their own for color.
Well, that's exactly it. It's another part of the seasonality. These are just really, like I said, late fall, like late summer, early fall, they are really starting to come together. So when a lot of those other spring and those midsummer ones, they're done, these ones are just getting going, and they'll last a long time into the fall. I have a lot of stuff going on here because I really wanted to open up the seasonality more and get a lot more color. And being in a lot of sun, my plant palette opened up a little bit more compared to a shadier location.
And I would guess you again did plantings so that there would be something blooming in the spring and in the summer and in the fall too.
Absolutely. Love full seasonality. Like I said, this one has interest from the time the snow melts. I mean, a lot of times, depending on the winter, there's already grasses sitting there, the shrubs are sitting there, getting the irises blooming right away. Right now you can see the cone flowers there going. So yeah, I love a lot of interest because no matter when we come out here, the homeowners come out here, there's always something pretty to look at. And for the bugs and butterflies and stuff, like I said, we've seen a lot of that stuff. First year we've seen a lot of it.
So how long ago has this been planted?
Well, we started this one 2 years ago, but we've been adding every year. Actually, just a few days ago, we added some more shrubs, more irises. So yeah, it's a constant ongoing process, and I envision this one will probably end up coming out a little bit further every year because the homeowners really enjoy it. It's less for them to mow. It's easier for them to maintain. At first, you need to kind of water them like any other plant. You need to water them at first, but otherwise the maintenance is quite easy on these. Like I said, they're native plants that can handle the drought. They can handle rough conditions that our climate gives. So easy to take care of. Once again, though, we did use mulch. Helps, the hardwood shredded mulch helps as a great weed barrier.
I saw that. I noticed that you had again used mulch. How deep do you spread the mulch?
I like to do a good 4 inches of mulch. Now, initially when I put the mulch in, it might be around 5 or 6 inches because it's all fluffed up when you put it in. But within a pretty short period of time, it kind of compacts down from rain and just gravity. And so it ends up to be a good 3 to 4 inches thick mulch. But it's a shredded mulch, so like I said, it binds up, creates a good weed barrier. Now, it's a sunnier location, so we tend to have a little bit more weeds here. So we had to do a little bit of weeding, maybe once or twice a year, but that's about it. And eventually, these plants they're kind of spaced out and designed in a way that eventually they're all going to be thick and full, and they will start out competing any of the weeds that might come up. So first couple years, weeding, but as the years go on, less weeding every year.
When is the best time to be planting like a buffer or a rain garden?
Well, with time of planting, I prefer a spring or a fall. The times are a little bit cooler. The plants, I mean, anytime you transplant and put a plant in the ground, it's kind of a little bit of shock to them. But if you do it in the midsummer and it's really warm, it can be actually another shock added on. Now, I've done a lot of plantings in the summer. You can do it, but you got to be on top of the maintenance and the watering a little bit more in midsummer. So if I had a preference, I would do it in early spring or later fall.
I know many people that I have visited with have also had trouble with shoreline getting pushed up by the ice. Have you dealt with that at all?
These homeowners, as long as they've owned this land for the last 35 plus years, 40 years, routinely they have the ice comes in across the lake in the springtime and creates big heaves up on the shoreline. Happens often, it's pretty common. Now these homeowners, they don't knock it down, they leave it up there, which actually helps because then it's less, when it does come up in consequent years, they don't have as much damage because it's already kind of heaved up a little bit. So when it comes to those ice shelves kind of heaving up, it's kind of nicer to just leave them be because it's going to happen again.
If any of our viewers and listeners want to explore having a rain garden or a buffer zone or do shoreline restoration, where can they go?
The best first step is contact your conservation district. Every county has a conservation district, or a lot of urban areas, a little more urban areas, a lot of times they have watershed districts. So contacting conservation districts, the watershed districts, the great first step.
So then they can advise you more as to what you might want to do and how you would maybe go about doing it.
Yeah, the conservation districts and the watershed districts, they'll help you often with technical and sometimes funding. And they, a lot of times homeowners, they can contact, there's companies, company like such as myself, can give a lot of information and tell you how to do it, or we can actually do the work for the homeowners. But if they want funding, they really need to contact conservation districts or the watershed districts.
I remember a few years ago we voted on the legacy funding where our sales tax increased a little bit. So is that money used to help pay for some of these projects to improve our water quality?
Yeah, the Minnesota Clean Water Land and Legacy Funds Act, that amendment that was voted for quite a few years ago now, this is where a lot of the funding came. For this shoreline buffer and the rain garden we just seen, that's where a lot of that funding came from.
This has been so interesting, and I just want to thank you so much for all of your knowledge and for sharing your knowledge and for showing us all of these plants and what people can do to help increase our water quality.
Well, thank you for inviting me here, Mary. It's been a great time.
Additional support provided by Mark and Margaret Yackel-Julien in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. ShalomHillFarm.org.